All right, Aaron. So what we're looking at is an image from NPR's page, their news page, the National Public Radio page. And this image is utilized in an article that talks about the fact that recently a statue of Father Juniper Serro was removed as an act of racial justice protest in Sacramento, and by activists, by racial justice activists, and I want to use this image and the article that goes along with it to talk about contexts of art making. And I think, Aaron, although this wasn't part of what you learned when you learned drawing instruction, we can begin to think about the naming of art and the removal of art as acts of art making as well. And we can talk about how the contexts of art include public spaces and public arenas and public actions that may or may not, belong to constructs of state property, but almost always belong to constructs of property in one way or another, because we live in a system that's defined by the rules, regulations, and operation and existence of capital. And so it's almost impossible to escape the grammar of capitalism in the creation of a work of art. But it's possible in certain ways to shape and select types of grammar that one works within that system. And so, there's a great difference in private, versus public ownership and space, and there's a difference in also in who is authorized to name a piece, or who is authorized to place a piece, or who is authorized to police the space of a piece, and what happens to that particular work, or that particular object within that space. And there are acts and there are actions that can challenge all of the assumptions behind those authorships, authorities, policings, and placings, and namings, and all of those contexts are important when you begin to think about art as a political work, as opposed to seeing the events of the world with this, sort of transparent eyeball, and so that all of those, kinds of selections are important. Now, this is Assemblyman James Ramos, and what he's holding in his hand is a gourd rattle. And the image struck me powerfully because it reminded me of an event that I participated in 2012 that was very similar to the decision that James Ramos and other members of the California Senate made to replace the statue of this mission Father Juniper Serro, which had been removed, with a a monument or some kind of memorial to the native peoples of the area. And the reason that it was powerful for me was because my rattle instructor, I was given instructions on how to make a rattle and how to gather the stones for a rattle, and how to respond emotionally to the gathering of the stones for a rattle, and how to decide on the gourd design, and how to, and the size, and purpose of all of this, becomes part of the way that one constitutes the rattle. But my rattle instructor, whose name was Larry, and I participated in an event similar to this that involved the renaming of a hall in Southern California at the location of a mission. And this mission, Mission San Luis Rey, in San Luis Rey, or Oceanside, California, was the site of powwows that the San Luis Rey band of Luiseno people put on every year in the summer at this mission. And the powwow grounds, Larry and I spent, it takes a long time to prepare the grounds for a powwow, because there's dancing, and you have to have a good space for the dancers, so that they can do their fancy dancing, and you have to have a good space for the vendors to put up their tents, and you have to, there has to be, the ground has to be even, and the ground has to be free. There, we had a big problem with gophers, and here in Arizona, where we're at now, we would have the same issue with prairie dogs. But we had to water the ground, and we had to make sure that the grass was full and green and lush, for the dancers, and we had to bless the ground, and all of this took a lot of time. But in the process of working with Larry, really the main part of what I learned was, I learned how to do certain things. And Larry was a hawk spirit person, and so I learned hawk medicine from him. And I'm an owl medicine person, and so that I had to learn pretty much on my own. But we would talk about those certain connections, and so the blessings, mostly how to perform certain kinds of blessings, I learned from Larry, and how to build a rattle, and how much time and effort goes into the building of the rattle, and how if you come from a certain place, then you have to go to that place to get the stones for that rattle. You can't just buy them in the store or find them somewhere. So one of the parts of the learning for me was to get these stones in the Sonora Desert, and I had to listen to where the stones wanted to talk to me about being selected for this rattle, and that's a big part of it, and understanding the value of what you take and how you take it and how you ask and how you bless a place and how you return to a place and how you learn from a place and how you learn about the history of processes in time that belong to a place. And so Larry and I, would do this, and I would work with him, and we would identify different kinds of feathers, and he would talk to me about certain kinds of hawk blessings, and and then some of that I don't want to say too much about, but then we also both Larry and I worked with Mel Vernon was the captain, or you could say chairman. The San Luis Rey band wasn't recognized by the U.S. government at that time, and still aren't, I believe. And what that means is that they didn't have a reservation, so they had the tribe. The band had no land that was granted to them. Now there were other Luiseno tribes in that area in Southern California that did have reservations and land and had tribal governments, and the San Luis Rey band certainly had organization, but didn't have a recognized government in the same way that that we're familiar with tribes that do have those kinds of rights and that are granted authority and independence in certain locations, right? So space is really important, and in the understanding and in the history of what having rights is, and if you don't have a land or place of your own and it's been stolen, then there's work to be done and struggle to engage. And anyway, so Aaron, Larry and I would prepare the grounds for the powwow, and then when the powwow started, then we would we would perform other tasks, like I would set up tents, and Mel, the captain or the chairman, would give me instructions about there's a gopher hole needs to be filled in, or go help over here, or take the car and go do something else, get water, whatever it was, and then after it was all done, it was interesting because like the vendors really appreciated that everything was clean and ready, but when everybody left, there was a mess, right? So I was kind of like one of those people that had to deconstruct everything as well as get the ground ready. And because this location was on Mission San Luis Rey, where we would do the powwows, you also have to interface with the the Franciscans, right? And it's still a functional mission, and it's still like an operating, church and place of worship for the Catholic community. And so you can't just leave a mess when you're done. You have to make sure everything's cleaned up and nobody gets in trouble. And that was a large part of my job. I spent even after the powwow was over, months, just gleaning the grounds, for whatever leftover dyed chicken feathers or candy wrappers or whatever it was, and making sure that it was more or less immaculate before beginning a next ground preparation. And I want to suggest that that kind of work is also a kind of art. It's not fancy dancing, but it's a different kind of art. And that what Larry and I did was also a kind of dancing. And my rattle instructor and my ground preparation instructor and my blessing instructor was a kind of dancer too, but not a fancy dancer, a different kind of dancer. And in some ways that's metaphorical, and in some ways it's not. But the difference, a lot of that difference relates to the difference between art that has both a ritual and political function, and art that presents itself in other ways as merely something for sale, or for something that represents in a different kind of way, or reinforces a different set of cultural values, right? So what I'd like you to do to begin this discussion, that's the backdrop. And what I'd like you to do to begin this discussion is just read the piece from the NPR article. And then we'll talk a little bit about it, and we can go from there. All right. So go ahead and read that.
California will replace a former statue on state capitol grounds honoring a Spanish missionary with one celebrating Sacramento area Native American tribe. Erected more than 50 years ago, the statue of Father Junipero Serra was forcefully toppled by racial justice protesters in July 2020 and has been in storage since. The legislation, which officially removes the statue of Serra, was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, at a virtual ceremony attended by Native American leaders from throughout the state. "We don't condone the violence and the tearing down of statues that are there," said Democratic Assemblyman James Ramos, who authored the bill. However, there's built up frustration. For years, California Indian people have been talking about the mission system. Ramos, the first California-born Native American elected to the legislature, said his grades suffered when he objected to building a replica mission in 4th grade, a former requirement and longtime tradition for California public school students. By establishing the first 9 of California's 21 Spanish missions in 1700s, Serra is viewed by many as one of the founding fathers of California. He's widely celebrated by the Catholic Church, and, despite objections from Native Americans, he was canonized by Pope Francis in 2015. His defenders say Serra fought to protect Native people from Spanish soldiers and other forces. The Indian people became the laborers that would build those missions, and when some tried to leave, they were brought back many times forcefully, Ramos said. He said credible reports detail the shackling of Native people at California missions. The bill sparked some passionate debate within the legislature, with opponents arguing Sarah didn't enslave Native people and that shackles were used for public safety. The bill was one of 6 signed by Newsom supporting the state's first residents. Another bill authored by Ramos and signed by Newsom removes Columbus Day as a judicial holiday and replaces it with California Native American Day in September.
All right, thank you, Aaron. And one of the things that, that was a great reading, by the way. I want to focus on one sentence. We'll just do a close reading of one sentence in that article that you read, and I only want to really call attention to it because I want to come back to similar experiences that I've had with emissions and failures to on the part of media and the communities that these places belong to respond to these histories. The bill sparked some. I'm repeating what you read, Aaron. The bill sparked some passionate debate within the legislature, with opponents arguing Sarah didn't enslave Native people and that shackles were used for public safety. Just that phrase, that shackles were used for public safety. I can almost let silence speak for me around that phrase. Having experienced shackles, having experienced being handcuffed by the police for periods exceeding 12 hours for no, explicit or express purpose other than to be shackled as a form of intentional violence, for daring to speak out against a policy or daring to perform an action questioning an authority. In spaces that have no public and so require no public safety, right? I was shackled in confined spaces. Shackles are never used for public safety. There are all kinds of ways to ensure the safety of the public, very few of which involve safety. Shackles are used for purposes of containing individuals and suppressing the individual's attempts to escape brutalization and escape murder and escape torture and escape beatings and escape being raped and to escape demoralizations and to escape humiliations and to escape becoming someone else's property and to escape forced labor and to escape the violence of forced marches and to escape being indoctrinated in a religion that doesn't belong to one's culture and to escape being indoctrinated into an economic system that doesn't belong to one's culture and to escape a number of different other kinds of oppression of the human body and spirit and mind, and to suppress the desire to escape itself, and it's certainly an effective. Certainly, shackles are an effective, tool for that. But in any case, in this instance, it looks like the forces of liberation, at least to some extent, are moving forward, and that this action of changing the subject and content of this monument is going to happen. At least that's what it looks like. And then there will be a planning stage, and then decisions will be made around what type of monument and what it'll be called. And then, so this is an example of political change, a social and political change, social justice being organized around a monument. And all monuments, whether one conceives of them as high art or low art or public art or mass art or whatever, they belong, to this general category of art, and so they're relevant, to what we do as artists, and some memorials and monuments are incomparable as expressions of art. The Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. is certainly at the level of there's no possible way that you can experience this work and not see that the level of artistry and the level of sophistication and the level of aesthetic expression and power, you can't not see that belongs to the very highest expression of art in the 20th century, to equivalent to Barnett Newman or other extraordinary works. And sometimes these public art pieces don't manage to reach that level. So there's a wide range of one could say ability or talent or genius or lack of genius involved in this particular domain. But and sometime, and we know, Aaron, I've been discussing this with you, and I'm sure you're convinced by now, all art is always already political, but sometimes it pretends it isn't, and masks itself in these universalist terms, or promotes an ideology of a certain kind of nationalism or identification with patriotism, or that hides its ideological function. And then you have moments like this in which progressive change and a recognition of history is made, and the transformation of the content is an unveiling or undoing of a long history of oppression, and it really feels like the accomplishment, the moment of triumph of a certain long engaged struggle. And so this particular moment, reminded me of my work with Larry, and these here, what we're looking at is the San Diego Union. from June 9th, 2012, and the event that it's describing is one that took place at the Mission San Luis Rey in what's now Oceanside, California, where I grew up and went to school as a child, and this was the renaming of a building, and it was renamed after the Luiseño scholar Pablo Tak. And here, this is Mel. This is Mel Vernon. He was the captain and of the San Luis Rey band at the time, and this is the father that I can't remember the father's name. I don't know if I ever talked to the father. I think he barked some orders at me a couple of times. He came from a different. This was a Franciscan mission, and he came from a different location. That's me in the background, way back there. You can see me. I have long hair, and then this I can't remember his name either. But this man with the white hat was another one of the brothers at the mission. He was actually quite nice and engaging in conversation. But this particular father came in. He was really he didn't ever seem really that interested in the spirituality of the place or being a father in the traditional sense, but he was like a businessman. I always would see him smoking cigarettes, and he would wear like these jeans and short sleeve shirts, and he would be smoking and he'd talking on his cell phone, and why can't you get that over here sooner? And I think they brought him in because he was good at getting stuff done, and I don't know if he did or not, but that was around the time that the state was requiring this particular mission to redo some of the support systems and to put in rebar in the adobe frameworks of the walls. The walls are historical, right? So they didn't want to start a new building, because this mission is one of the oldest Catholic missions in California, and along the Mission Trail, right? And so to conform to the state's regulations, they had to redo the structure, and that took a long time. But he may have been brought in to facilitate how all of that was going to get done. And there was a big charity drive because even though the state required that these structures be, this isn't one of the structures, obviously, this was built much later, but even though the state required that these structures be reinforced, it wasn't providing the financial resources to do it. So a big drive had to be made, and they solicited people to work, gathering, volunteer money for this project, and they had a little, what do you call it? Well, they had, a chart, outside it that always gave you information about how much money was still needed, and and where the money was going, and how much money had been earned, and. In any case, while Larry isn't in this picture, at least I've never been able to find him in this particular picture. But while Larry and I were doing the work, on this project for the powwow, actually, I think it might have even been how Larry and I met. This particular building, this was a few months prior to this event, was vandalized and spray painted, and Larry was really concerned, because it's the building where supplies are stored for the powwows. The powwow took place in the back of the building. So see where I'm standing here. If you go to the left a little bit this way, the grounds for the powwow were back there, and anyway, you from those grounds you would have been able to see all of the graffiti and the remarks on this building, and whether it did or didn't have anything to do with the event of the powwow. The vandalism was disturbing. So Larry talked to me, and because I used to spend time down there, and at a local bakery as well, and anyway, the our first project was to get the graffiti off the back of the building, and then that took a while too, and I remember Larry was really frustrated about it because the police needed to document whatever was done to the building, but in the process of documentation, which was slow, we couldn't paint it, we couldn't paint over it, and we almost ended up painting over it anyway, but finally it got done, and then we could move on to other projects, such as this one, the renaming of this space, and so let's take a look at some of these images. So this is Mel. He's holding an abalone shell. The reason that he's holding an abalone shell is that it's traditional to use the abalone shell as the bowl or the container in which white sage is held as it's burned, and the white sage is used to smudge or bless events and certain kinds of objects and people and certain ceremonies and rituals and other things as well, and that blessing of the sage it belonged to was his role here as the captain to perform that for the sign and for the event of naming. Here's Mel burning the sage that's the white sage that's a blessing for Pablo Talk Hall. Now neither Larry or I gathered this particular sage bundle, but both Larry and I did gather and dry sage bundles for the blessings at the powwow, and I probably Mel made this bundle himself, and he's using the abalone shell here to catch the fallen ash, and he'll place the sage bundle in the abalone shell to give the blessings, and that's not the way that I burn sage anymore. Aaron, you probably know this already, but I burn it in my hand because one of the blessings that I was given is I can handle fire that way, and I don't recommend that anyone does that who doesn't have that blessing. So this is not an endorsement for a different way of burning sage, but just you find what is given to you. So Mel is performing that act. Now, what I want to suggest is that these acts, give evidence to what I'm the formulation that I'm going to make. That the powwow that that Larry and I prepared and worked facilitating, and also helped to clean up, was a space of art, an art event, right? An art event, a complex art event with a lot of different moving parts, right? Like vendors and dancers and drummers and singers and openings but I also want to suggest that this particular renaming of this particular building was also an art event, and you see in the ritualized moments of the performance, that there's clearly a recognition of this being the case, and if you look, Mel very subtly has ceremonial, very subtly, but still, has ceremonial dress, and is performing, a ceremony or ritual that is very similar to what you would see enacted at the powwow. But I also want to suggest that there's a difference between the kind of dancing that you see at a powwow and what I want to call a kind of dancing, in this event. And in the powwow, you see fancy dancing. It's the idea of dance as display, and everybody recognizes it as an art, and you have to be extremely talented to do it, right? But I also want to suggest, and take a look at the next image, that the placement of this sign by this worker is also a dance, and you can see that it is in this image if you look closely, and you can see that the ladder that he climbs is the symbolic ladder that that's used in certain kinds of medicine ceremonies, and that represents this connection between the earth and the sky, and it represents a form of ascending, and these spiritual ascendings mark very significant spiritual journeys and performances and transactions, between what is above and the planes that we exist on. And this dance, however simple it appears to be here, is qualitatively different from the fancy dancing that exists in the powwows. And here's Larry in the foreground. You can, and that's me. Probably too casually leaning on the rail. You can see Larry is more purposely posed, and more, I think Larry may be, because he's closer to the photographer, aware that we're being photographed, and I'm completely oblivious to the fact that we're being photographed. But that's my teacher, and this is the dance that's being performed here. And the significance of it is that, the Pablo Talk was a Luiseno native who learned to read and write, and became a historian and scholar of the Luiseno language, and developed a system of writing that language, which previously didn't exist, and that there wasn't another version of a system to write the Luiseno language in until the 20th century. This scholar, and we'll come back to this later, died at a very young age in Rome at 19 years old. So he did all of this, before he was even 20 years old, which included a journey to Europe. And he wrote about the oppression of the Luiseno people by the missionaries. That these individuals in the California Senate now are claiming didn't happen, or at least they didn't happen on Father Juniper Serra's watch, which of course is absurd. If there were shackles, there was violence, and Pablo Tach wrote about it, and he expressed it. He expressed it even in the most unlikely situations, when he was being educated in Rome in Latin and being prepared for a life as a missionary. He still wrote about it, right? Which suggests that his intentions may have been somewhat different than what the expectations of the Catholic Church were in his display at Rome. At least that's what it suggests to me, and that's what it had always suggested to me, and why his name is so important to be here and presiding over the powwows, as an example of the dance of a sacred historian and a sacred a memory keeper of the history of these native peoples, and even if the large majority of those individuals who attend the powwows miss it, but it's there, and the event itself, was largely. I'll go back to the images. You did a great job of reading the article, Aaron, and I just want you to recall that this was in the San Diego Union Tribune, and they described who attended this. But if you look at the actual attendance, and so I was there. So I can report as a witness to this fact, that the only attendance of this event that is powerfully historical and important, and not only because the San Luis Rey Band was never recognized by the state or the U.S. government, and doesn't have its own land, but also because of the history of this mission, and how it was built by Native people, and how Native people suffered, and how that the only education that they were allowed to have was to be indoctrinated into this system. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when I go into more of the history of Pablo Tach. But for now, just let it be said that that this was Pablo Tach's idea to develop a writing system for Luiseno, not the idea of fathers and brothers and friars and whoever they might have been. Now, at this particular event, and this is where what I wanted to discuss, is that the only attendants of this event were the father, and then the one brother, and members of the San Luis Rey Band, and myself, and the photographer from the San Diego Union. But there weren't. You can see in the crowd, that this wasn't like an event that a lot of local residents in Oceanside or the surrounding area, the communities surrounding this area, like Carlsbad, Encinitas, La Jolla, didn't come out, to see this event. A lot of people show up for the powwow, right? A lot of people show up for the fun. but not a lot of people showed up for the historical event. Now, the fact that it doesn't have a big crowd could, do we measure it? Do we measure it by the number of participants in the audience, or do we measure it in some other way? What is significant? What is significance? What is meaning in making? And I want to suggest to you, Aaron, that there's a depth and importance and history that belongs to this event that exceeds the celebrations of the powwow. And when I say that, I don't mean to disparage, the powwows, and I don't mean to suggest in any way that it isn't a celebration or there's no reason to have them. I mean, I prepared the ground for them, and I did the work there. I am totally committed to the powwows, but I'm merely saying that that something else is happening here, and that there's a way of working that that not a lot of people participate in, but that belongs to a history of struggle, that belongs to a history of commitment, that belongs to a history of spirituality, that belongs to the history of medicine and the climbing of that sacred stairway that connects earth and the heavens above, and there's a way of seeing it and there's a way of missing it. And what I'm trying to teach you is I'm trying to teach you, Aaron, what my teacher taught me, the way of seeing it. I guess that's it. I guess that's the last of the images. All right. So, with that, having been said, then before I move on and talk about what the article didn't say, why don't you go ahead and read the article, and while you're reading the article, I'll scroll through the images and try to follow you.
The pungent smell of burning white sage filled the air Thursday as tendrils of smoke swirled around a simple cardwood sign outside Mission San Luis Rey in Oceanside. Mel Vernon, captain of the San Luis Rey Band of Luisino Indians, moved the sage back and forth as he blessed the sign, while a dozen fellow tribe members and Franciscan friars watched. The sign read, Pablo Tectal, commemorating one of the band's most important ancestors, whose name will now adorn a square building southwest of the main mission complex. Years ago, the building served as the mission school. There is powerful symbolism in putting Tech's name on a former house of learning. Born at the mission in 1820, he was taught by Franciscan friars in Mission San Luis Rey's school. Today, the Luisino people revere their ancestor for leaving behind written accounts of what life was like at the mission and in the surrounding countryside, long before what we now think of as North County existed. Tech did his writing in Rome, not California. He was one of two neophytes picked by Father Antonio Payeri to return to Spain in 1832 as Mexican secularization forced the Franciscans to take a much reduced role in running the missions they had built. Tech eventually went to Rome to continue his studies with the intent of becoming a missionary. While there, he wrote a dictionary of the Luisino language and several other pieces, including Conversion of the San Luisnos of Alta California and Indian Life and Customs at Mission San Luis Rey, a record of California mission life. His writing has been translated from Latin and Spanish into English. Vernon, the Luisino captain, said during Thursday's ceremony that he has long been frustrated that his people have never had a prominent place on the mission's grounds, even though it was Indian labor that helped build the place. All of the buildings and other structures at the mission, Vernon noted, are named for missionaries or other non-natives. The people that actually built the mission are invisible, Vernon said. There's a certain poetry, then, in a former school like Mission San Luis Rey being renamed Pablo Tech Hall. Its former name, Payeri Hall.
And what I wanted to point out after you read the piece that was presented, following the event in the San Diego Union, is what's missing. And there's a suggestion in giving that history that, well, first of all, there's an omission of the fact that Pablo Tach, died at 19, and how old he was when he accomplished all this. And it does mention that he, traveled to Rome to learn Latin with the intention of becoming a missionary. But that's misleading, because in fact, the university that he studied Latin in Rome, was self-designated as like the university of proselytizing propaganda, or something to that effect. And you can look it up in Wikipedia and find the exact expression. But they were very much aware that this was a project in evangelizing, right? So this was an evangelical educational system, and that to be educated at all, Pablo Tach had to subscribe, to certain systems of belief, and present himself as a missionary. Now, whether he was going to actually perform that function or not, we don't know, because he died before he would have realized his true mission. But my belief is that that he was savvy and understood that in order to receive an education, that he had to present himself in this manner. And the evidence for that is the fact that even in his early writings, before he had turned 20, before he had passed from this world into the next, he was already criticizing the priests and the other members of the community at the Mission San Luis Rey, and their treatment of the native people. And in his histories, he criticizes the priests, and you can see that, I mean, maybe the photos don't capture it quite well, but there's a certain quality. I wish I could remember the name of the father, presented here, but both Mel and the priest are wearing sunglasses, and this kind of Western confrontation image, and you can see the kind of I won't say it, but you can see the look on the father's face, and the way that his chin is turned down, and you can see, the sort of loving respect that, Mel receives from the community. And you can see that Mel is very much aware of the micro expressions and the gestures, and the way that he very gently, returns a gesture with the abalone shell. And Mel, I always love these images of Mel Vernon, because they're subtle, but they are very intentionally crafted, right? Just like certain kinds of seeing is very intentionally crafted, and certain exchanges of gaze are very intentionally crafted. And if you read between the lines, you'll see that the information is there, right? Now this one presents on the plaque presents his Pablo Tach's years as representing 21 years in this plane, and my understanding was that he was 19, but the discrepancy may belong to different histories and an imprecise date for Pablo Tach's birth, but what is missing is the criticism that does belong to the histories that Pablo Tach left behind, and maybe the reason for its being missing in this particular text that belongs to the San Diego Union Tribune is the same reason that recently in the California Senate, Father Juniper Sarah was, relieved of the responsibility that the use of those shackles, obviously points to as gestures of violence and oppression and enslavement, and the reason for failing to rewrite the history as it really happened is an inability, really, like a psychological inability to come to terms with the history of racial injustice in the United States, particularly as that injustice was directed against Native American people and the African peoples who were brought here against their will. There's a passage actually in Wikipedia that I'll refer to, Aaron, because that's a drawing. It may or may not really be a drawing by Pablo Tach, but it's presented as a drawing by Pablo Tach. I have no opinion on the matter whether that's historically accurate or not. In the mission of San Luis Rey de Francia, the Fernandino father is like a king. He has his pages, alcaldes, mayordomos, musicians, soldiers, gardens, ranchos, livestock. This is from the journals and histories of Pablo Tach. And also this line: the chief stood up and met them, demanding, "What are you looking for? Leave our country." And these don't particularly sound like the historical writings or notes of someone who intends to become a missionary, right? So I think there's textual evidence that, or one could argue that that it's unclear whether Pablo Tach meant to learn Latin and how to write in a way that he could express this history for the purposes of merely becoming a missionary, or whether he had other intentions. I think there's good internal evidence that he may have had alternative plans, and thus probably belongs to the history of those individuals who are being written in our book and who died in the service of struggle, right? So I have always thought that Pablo Tach belonged to the 144. In Quechua, Not long ago, there were 5,000 souls with all their neighboring lands. Through a sickness that came to California, 2,000 souls died and 3,000 were left. And Aaron, so I guess, in relating, this event and the so few people that showed up for the renaming of the hall, to watch this dancer climb a sacred ladder and to place a sacred image on a sacred building. I guess I just wanted to make the connection with whatever happens in Sacramento, and to remind people not to miss an important moment in history, even though it may be more entertaining and fun. To just show up for the powwow.